All right, I will call this meeting to order, and to start, I have a script to read. This is the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee meeting of June 16th, and we are meeting over remote connection. So as a preliminary matter, my name is Mary Longacre. I'm the chair of the committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Committee members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Graham Durovich.
Here.
Fritz McClure.
Here.
Sarah Boyce.
Here.
Peter Bryce.
Here.
Gary Beller.
Here.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
Thank you. At the moment, Matt Fee and Ian, and I'm just blanking on Ian's last name, are not yet in attendance. Thank you. Ian Golding, not in attendance at the moment. This meeting is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the Governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will allow public comment. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Okay, we are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. We are not anticipating speakers, but should anybody wish to speak, please remember to state your name in advance of your comments. Let's see. Please remember, or please attempt to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. That would be for people who are not members of the committee. I think it will be necessary at some points to have an open discussion for our agenda today. So if members want to remain unmuted, then I don't see an issue with that. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. Let's do our best to try and wait for recognition from the chair before speaking. But as I said, we will have somewhat of an open discussion. That's what I'm anticipating for some of the agenda items. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. And let me just check. I do need to also identify the staff, and I will take a moment to identify the members who have joined. Matt Fee, can I confirm that you can hear me? Please respond.
Yes.
Thank you. And staff, we have Vince Murphy from the Natural Resource Department, our Coastal Resilience Coordinator.
Here.
Holly Backus is attending from the, is it still the Planning Department, Holly?
Yes.
Okay,
Here.
thank you. And we have Chuck Larson attending. Chuck, can you just confirm that we can hear you?
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you, Mary.
And I do see some members of the public. Thank you for attending. Okay. If technical difficulties should arise, we should suspend the meeting while attempts to resolve those difficulties are made. And let's see. I think that is all the technicalities. Did I miss anything? Did anybody wants to point out this is my first time running through this? All right, thank you. So turning to the first item on the agenda, that would be the committee discussion for the recommendation to the select board. Vince sent out a copy of what we landed on last meeting 3 months ago or more. And hopefully all members received that. Vince, I am going to ask you to screen share for that. And I'm going to see if I can figure out how to see both the people and the screen share. Because that was not included in our public documents. So give me a second here.
Okay, so that's shared.
Yeah, I've got to just, fortunately, naturally, when you try and do something new, you screw it up the first time. So give me a second. Okay, I am able to put all of people's pictures on one screen and have the screen share up on the other screen. So fantastic. So I will be looking sideways some of the time to a second screen. Okay. So Vince, so first question, did anybody have any comments on the draft that Vince sent out? I thought it did a pretty good job of capturing what we ended up on in the meeting. I did watch the meeting recording last night to confirm that. Does anybody have a comment? If you want, you can either visually raise your hand or unmute yourself if you're muted. Happy to take comments on this. Jen, go ahead.
Okay, I just had 2 comments that I now need to go find because I put my screen down. And I apologize if there's noise in the background. My children are here. The only comment that I had on this, Vince, was just in the 2 sections below the sea level rise projections. We give the flooding information and then we give the storm tide pathways information. And I just thought it would be great if there was a sentence in each of these, and this actually looks different than what I had from your email.
Yeah, Vince, that's not the right document.
Or maybe we didn't get the right document in the email.
No, I think we got the right document, but this is an older version.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I didn't open from the email. I opened from my drive, and I had to download a whole bunch of stuff before I could come home to do it. All right, give me 1 moment. Apologies. Stop sharing.
Just to give me a heads up, did anyone else have comments? Just visually raise your hand so that I'll know who's queued up. Okay, Graham. Okay, don't see anybody else right now. Gary, did you have something you wanted to add? You're muted at the moment, Gary. You have to unmute.
Mute. When I looked at the language, it's awfully passive. It just says that they will use the latest information, but I would have preferred, I don't know if it's possible, to say that they actually should be considering. In other words, it's so passive. It just says whenever these projects are brought before them, they should be aware of the latest, be aware of and use the latest sea level projections, without saying that, and they should take that into consideration in their approval process. But those words are not in there anywhere. And so it just seems awfully passive to me, that's all.
All right, when we get the document up, let's take a look at that again.
Okay.
Graham, did you want to preface your remarks while we're waiting for the document?
This is the one I emailed, I think, now. Sorry, Graham.
No, because there shouldn't be anything in erosion. The one I received didn't have anything about erosion in it because we had taken that out. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But a moment.
This is Graham.
Go
To
ahead.
speak to Gary's point, it does say to be aware and use the best, most current data on sea level rise, et cetera, in their decisions, deliberations, and project planning. So I think it perhaps covers that, although Gary, please speak to that. My, just a small thing is to have sea level rise, and we start using the abbreviation SLR, and just show that in parentheses after the first use of sea level rise, so when it comes up later, the reader knows what we're talking about.
And I want to remind the committee, we had a discussion at our last meeting about sending any sort of language edits to Vince where you're not changing the meeting, but inserting, you know, minor corrections or points like Graham just made about making sure all acronyms are spelled out. Send those to Vince in advance in writing so that he can incorporate those, and we're not using everyone's time to go over minor edits. We can focus on the content. Jen, did there anything else you wanted to add while you're waiting for the document to come up, or did you need that in front of us?
No, I can go ahead. It was pretty simple. It was just, we say in the sea level rise projections, you know, what our recommendation is. But for the other two sections, both the flooding section and the storm surge section, we just give the data, but don't necessarily give any kind of recommendation. And I don't know if we just wanted a sentence in there for each section that says what our recommendation is related to storm frequency, as in this is the data and we recommend that if this impacts your area, you consider it. And in the storm surge section, we just give information to where the storm tide pathways are, but I don't know if we want an additional, just a recommendation in there as well. And this might move to Gary's point a little bit to strengthen it by saying, we recommend that you look at these maps to consider if your project or area is within a potential storm tide pathways, and to use that to influence your deliberations and planning, something to that effect, just to further point out the use of those two sections outside of sea level rise.
Yeah, Vince, I don't think that's the right document yet.
Okay, in that case.
Can I email it to you, or what's the best way to get it to you?
Just to my email. Work email is right to open here. I have too many versions. That's a problem.
Yeah.
I apologize for that.
Can you do it? But what date was it sent?
That's what I'm just looking for. Yeah.
Oh, that's what I already tried.
I have it from Wednesday the 10th, and I have it open if you want me to just send it now.
I think Mary's doing it, but if you can as well, Jen.
She's got it.
Not trying to get anyone to race, but.
Yeah, I'm sending the email from June 10th that you sent to us, Vince, and that has the document. Sorry, as my head whips back and forth between three screens. If I don't see you, just let me know when I'm looking forward.
Here we go.
Yes. Okay. So this is the most current version that was sent out June 10th. And one of the reasons that I can tell that is because in the recommendation in bold, it uses the language decisions, deliberations, and project planning. And that was language that we hashed out at the last meeting. So Jen, if you want to come back to what you wanted to point out here on the document.
I'll just reiterate, it was the 2 sections farther down below sea level rise, where we have the section here on storm frequency, and we describe what the data is that we're giving, but we don't give the same kind of recommendation here that we had in the sea level rise data section that just encouraged the use of this particular set of data or what portion of the table we wanted the boards to consider. And I thought it just might strengthen it if we had a sentence in like that. And then the same for below this, the additional information, which might just be better termed the storm tide pathways or storm surge information, since we lay all those out. A sentence in here saying, please consider the resources we've provided to determine if your project is within this area and whether or not you need to adapt your project to the data in the storm surge areas.
So I take your point there, Jen. I'm remembering the conversation that Fritz started at our last meeting, which was to say, you know, be specific and clear in what you're recommending to boards. But I think you have a point that our specific recommendation is not as clear as it could be. And so what I would do is I would take our specific recommendation out of the paragraph that starts the projected sea level rise for Nantucket is 4 to 6 feet by 2100. So the sentence that says the CRAC recommends following the high NOAA projections to accommodate moderate storm surge as well as sea level rise. I would take that sentence and I would put that in our bolded recommendation at the top. Say, these are the numbers that we're recommending you follow. Not just we're recommending you use the latest info, and here's 3 different sets and figure out what you need to do from each set. Because the numbers aren't exactly the same. The NOAA high scenarios numbers don't exactly match the scenario numbers from the other table. And don't exactly match the storm tide pathways. They're different sets of information. So I think you've pointed out that we are not clear in what we're recommending. And so my suggestion to make it more clear would be to move that sentence. Interested in what other people think. Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
So I really appreciate what you are all saying. So I remember from our previous discussions, we talked about providing the data, but then also making a recommendation. And maybe to your point, Mary, instead of, you know, moving things, we have it as is. And then at the very top, we sort of have, I know it's a short document anyway, but we sort of have an executive summary where it's just like, these are the recommendations, and it's just those few sentences. And then there is more information below about where the data comes from and our recommendations. So it's just, you know, reiterating the same information, but being very clear at the top that we like what the exact numbers are. Just a suggestion.
Further comments? Jen, go ahead.
Yeah, and if I may, I like your suggestion, Mary, of being more specific in the recommendation, because that recommendation, that executive summary, as Sarah said, is what people are going to look at first, and the rest of it is data that's kind of supporting the recommendation that we've made. But I don't think I would take it out of the sea level rise section. I think I would leave it in to strengthen that when someone goes down to look at the chart, they don't have to go back and see what that recommendation was. I think I'd leave it there. And I still think that I would further put a recommendation in each of the sections that would back up what our broader recommendation is at the top. I think it would focus, because as we did have that discussion with at the last meeting, we can provide all this data, but we're going to need to point people towards the data that is what we really want them to see out of it, or what we really want them to do with it. And I just think that would help strengthen the recommendation. But
So, Fritz, do you want to comment on how the planning board would interpret this as a directive if we had 3 recommendations as opposed to 1? And Jen, if I'm not stating what you said clearly, please correct me.
Yeah, let me just, I don't, I have it in front of me, but the way the screen is, I can't see everything. I don't think, I can't control it, right?
It's Vince controlling it.
Yeah. So just go down to, okay, wait a minute. I'm trying to remember whether what we did in the top, in the bold, clearly, we are certainly saying use the latest data. But I agree. I think when we come to the supporting information and below, we do need to be very specific about which data we're talking about, where there might be more than one set of data. So I think that's where, or in the chart, so that that's specifically why we did it down. If you can just go down a little bit, Vince. So in the chart, when we're dealing with sea level rise, obviously there were different, there is data, right? This is the latest data. But then what the specific recommendation was that from that data, you used the high projection. You understanding the distinction I'm making? Whereas if you go farther down, go on down, so what is the data in the last, when we get to the other, wait a minute, so this is flood level, wait a minute.
You want more down further? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see what other data. So storm surge.
This leads you to a map on the town website showing the storm tide pathways.
Okay. So just think about it for a minute. So if I'm on the planning board and somebody says you're supposed to use the latest data for storm surge, what am I looking, what does that tell me?
I think Jen could characterize that best, or Sarah.
And I think this is where a little bit more specificity would be useful, because we're providing the link to the map. And then I think we can say, please visit this map to look at the projected storm tide pathways and consider if your project is within one of these pathways where the water is projected to rise over time, and if you potentially need to adjust, because it gives more data than just sea level rise. It shows where the water will move given elevation.
Okay, so now I'm just going to play devil's advocate, which I agree. I think we're moving in the right direction. So I say, okay, I'm on the planning board. I've looked at the table, and this project is within the storm surge path. Now, as a planning board member, what should I be making sure that the applicant is doing?
And that is a really good question. I think from the storm tide pathways, and yeah, I'll definitely let you chime in, Vince. I was just going to say it shows the height of water, so it would be a similar recommendation to what they would do to adapt, I think, to potential sea level rise. But
so Vince has comment. Graham had some comments, and I have a comment as well. So Vince, can you
see
shed?
Where I'm going? Very specific. Okay, now what do I do? You know, it's like I'm walking through it, and I'm reading it and I'm walking through it trying to figure out what do I need that applicant, what do I need to know and make sure that applicant's doing. That's
okay,
what I meant.
Vince, and then we'll go to Graham. Okay,
so just to give an idea of what the storm tide pathways is for a start, it's roughly speaking 13 feet is the maximum, but it goes in 1 foot increments, shows where water will go and to what elevations. It's broadly very similar to the FEMA flood maps. It does go a bit further than the FEMA flood maps. So one suggestion may be to link this to the FEMA flood map in some way with a sentence saying that, you know, to take into account the FEMA flood zone that you're in. That's just an idea from my point of view. I think that's about one of the nicer ways of dealing with it. Sorry.
Okay, Graham, I want to get back to you. Hopefully you haven't lost your comment. I know it doesn't last long in my brain when I have one.
It's not so pertinent to where we are now, but just echoing Jen's comments that we have this all kind of laid out. I know I wasn't there when you guys first wrote this up, and so reading this the first time, the executive summary, I was like, okay, what current data? So at some point up there in the executive summary, either explain very specifically that we're talking about NOAA and other things, or say, please see below to our recommendations. And furthermore, as I went through the document, then I was wondering the later with the storm surge and the storm frequency, what exactly we were recommending at that point as somebody who hadn't sat in the meeting before. So I like where we're going with this.
That's good feedback. Thank you. So Vince and Jen, either the storm surge pathways, that is current information. So, I'm asking, I'm not telling. So that would not reflect any sea level rise. Is that correct? Okay, is Jen's nodding? Yeah. Okay, so that information is a little bit different in type than the other two. So what if we added some clarification to say how people should use the information that we're presenting? So under storm surge, we would say, use this information to identify if a property is currently at risk of flooding in a storm event. Under the sea level rise projection, under the storm frequency and impact on sea level rise, I think we could highlight that USACE high column the way that we've highlighted the high column for the NOAA table. And, and that would add, add some clarity on, how we're making a recommendation. And then the final thing that I might add, which addresses a different question that was raised, is, Vince, can you scroll up to the next section up? Yes, so our recommendation that we recommend the following high NOAA project to accommodate moderate storm surge as well as sea level rise. So I think that sentence does address both the two tables, the sea level rise and the storm surge one. We might just copy that then rather than remove it, but I think we should say that in our recommendation at the top. I think that will give a little bit more clarity as to why we're pointing to the data that we're pointing at. We're using two tables to support that recommendation.
Okay.
Matt, go ahead. You're muted. You're muted, Matt. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Took me a minute. It's different. I think if you added, if we're making a recommendation that will have a height to it, and we just pick the height that's closest for the storm surge, because we're talking about storm surges by height, and we're adding sea level rise and moderate storm surge. That should give us our number, and we should recommend that.
That's what the second table does. But and Vince, correct me again if I'm not stating this correctly. We're recommending the NOAA data because it is frequently updated, and the Army Corps of Engineers, we're not anticipating that data will be frequently updated. Is that a true statement, Vince?
Yes. So NOAA
Okay.
is constantly tinkering with their work, and they have an online mapping system that we can always see if there's any changes. The the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers report is from 2014, and I don't think that is going to be updated. This was from within a report, not within a mapping system, but still based on Nantucket data.
Mary, go ahead.
Sarah, you need to unmute and go ahead.
Yeah, so I could be wrong, but in the interest of clarification, would it be helpful to not actually have the Army Corps of Engineers data? I think it's very important that we have this information, but in a document like this where we're making recommendations, I'm just playing devil's advocate, does it confuse the issue more with multiple types of recommendations. And, I think to Matt's point, I don't want to do the exact have one number, but I think that maybe with the NOAA data, because it is updated frequently, and then the storm surge data, which is a different set of data, maybe having those two in this framework might be useful. And then my other point for a later discussion, or after we kind of talk about this a little bit more, is once again the timelines that are shown on the tables, what years we have available. I know it depends on the type of project that's being planned, what the longevity of it is, so it's kind of up to the user. But I don't know if we want to have a discussion of that too.
I will point out that there is possible confusion between the two tables because they use different timeframes. The NOAA table goes to 2100. The Army Corps table goes to plus 100 years, which would be 2120. And that is something that I find confusing. I'm always looking at which line on the table matches up with which other line, and they don't match exactly. And so I think that's a valid question. Should we even include the Army Corps data, or at least include the table here? Could we include it by reference the way we had with the storm time pathways rather than including an actual table?
So if we did that, what would our recommendation, then where is that leading me? If I'm a planning board member?
One table of data, the NOAA data use the high scenario, and it's
so
broken out in
gives us
10-year increments. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm saying, okay, so now when we're looking at these projects or approving the projects, we need to, what you're telling me is for X number, a project that's going to last X number of years, it needs to take into account that there's going to be 8 feet of sea level rise.
Right.
Now, if that comes from the table, from the high table, or whatever the term is for the firm. Now, what does that give me? Yeah, I mean, I'm just throwing out a number. Where does that, I just lost my screen. Anyway, so then where does that lead us with the other two tables? Now I go down to storm surge and I go down to flooding. What does that tell me?
What we're proposing to remove the storm surge table, but leave the information in. So that you're not hopefully confused by a second table with other data for different years. Imagine you're somebody saying, well, if I've got a 25-year lifespan, well, I've got 25 years on the Army Corps table, but I don't have a 25-year interval on the NOAA table, so maybe I'm supposed to use the Army Corps data for 25 years. There's a potential for confusion. Holly has a comment. Go ahead, Holly.
Yes, I kind of want to bring the overallness of this document. And at the end of the day, this is a recommendation to the select board from you all for other departments, other boards, what have you, to take these recommendations in prior to having an approved coastal resiliency plan, which is going to have its own set of recommendations. Am I clear on that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so to further on that, I think that might be something you would want to clearly identify. So that way, when we do have the coastal resiliency plan, which is going to have its own recommendations for, the master plan, all the other different plans that we have for the town, that way they know that this document has been superseded by the coastal resiliency plan. I think that needs to be clear, because then you're going to have, I think, people that are going to question, well, why is the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Board providing these recommendations when they're supposed to be creating coastal? I'm just thinking outside the box here.
Yeah. So Holly, would you look at the very first sentence and see if that accomplishes what you're talking about? Because that was definitely our intent.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I apologize on that. Yes, as long as it's clear, because I think you're going to have, engineers, designers, agents, what have you, that are going to want to make sure that they are taking these recommendations into account. And I think there just needs to be that clear consistency between, or clarification between what this document is supposed to be doing and what a future coastal resiliency plan is going to be. So yes, I think that is sufficient. Thank
Great.
you.
Because that was absolutely our intent. Chuck, did you have a comment there? And then Gary, I'll come to you.
Right. So, yeah, I understand what you're trying to do here. And yeah, I applaud the effort. What we have currently is, regulatory review and approval using FEMA standards and the building code. And so that pretty much dictates a base flood elevation. The FEMA elevations do not account for sea level rise. So you could add, the freeboard above that to accommodate sea level rise to give you a design flood elevation. And that design elevation would probably be the minimum standard. There could be additional standards that an engineer would bring to a project, but that could set your minimum threshold for which you'd be providing protection. And that would kind of keep it clean, because really right now everything is based off FEMA regulations and their levels. Obviously, storm tide pathways might show something a little higher than FEMA, and then you'd add sea level rise on top of that. I think you could kind of factor it in that way. If you had other data, you could probably take the more extreme measures. But I think at a minimum, we want to, consider building off FEMA, as I've seen in multiple other communities, is that they had a freeboard to accommodate future sea level rise based on the life of the project. And that could be 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, even foot intervals.
So I'm going to suggest, and again, feedback welcome, we don't intend this document to be so specific that it would tell an engineer exactly what they need to do. And we also don't intend it to only be used by engineers. We intend it to be used by any town department or vendor, as stated, and for any sort of decision-making process where this might be relevant. And I think we did see what you're describing, Chuck, in the Harbor Masters building planning process. And then I want to go to Vince and Gary. I apologize, I will come back to you. Vince, can you address that?
Sure. So I understand exactly where Chuck is going with the DFE and flood elevations. It would require an engineer to work on that one. And that is one of the things that's suggested for the Coast Resilience Plan. And well, hopefully we'll be hiring consultants within the next, 6 weeks or so, maybe a little longer, but that kind of time frame. And then we can have the consultants work on developing the DFE. It's just a bit much for this recommendation at the moment, Chuck. I appreciate what you're saying, though. This is only just kind of an interim catch-all for the next year and a half until the Coast Resilience Plan is in place, so that any building that does take place in that time would at least have some consideration towards sea level rise. That's the main intent of it, not to give a final number.
Yeah, and just to stress, it's not just about buildings. We mentioned the town's yard sale program at the last meeting. Should we be selling land we might be able to use for coastal resilience? Gary, I want to make sure that you had a chance, and then Holly, I see your hands up as well.
Okay, so maybe it's okay. When I looked at the word, when I was talking before about, I didn't want it to be too passive. It does say use. Says use the best and most current data. And what Fritz said when he was talking about the planning board interested me, because he said when he was looking at the data that we would need to do that. So my question is, with this language, use as opposed to require to use, something like required, will all of the town boards or committees that are supposed to be looking at this, will they all feel that this language requires them to look at these issues, sea level rise issues, in their decisions, deliberations, and project planning? If the only word there is use, could people say, well, if we chose to get into that, we'd have to use the latest data, but we choose not to get into that sea rise stuff? I want to make sure they understand they are required to do that.
Well, we did say first need to be aware of, so there shouldn't be any loophole about, oh, we didn't know.
But if they're aware of, does that mean that they have to use that? They are required to use it in their consideration? Maybe it's good enough. I just,
I think
just don't want someone to think that if they choose to think about those things, that have to use the most up-to-date information, that's all.
I think we were also taking our status as an advisory board. We can't require anybody to do anything. We are advising the select board that this is our recommendation for how the town could best proceed, but we don't really have any teeth, and that's just life. Holly, I see you nodding, but if you wanted to add something to that.
Yes, through you, Mary. That's my point. This is a recommendation from this advisory board, specifically calling out basically BMPs, best management practices for this, for these issues. And you cannot require a regulatory board like the select board, like the planning board, like all the other different boards for the town to require them to use this information without them changing their rules and regulations. I'm just trying, I'm putting my planner's hat on because that's very, very important. But this is a step in the right direction because it gives them the knowledge that they need to be aware of and say, oh, okay, so when we update this plan, when we update that, when we do this, when we do that, we need to take this into consideration. You can't require them until they have a law that requires it. So I just wanted to make on that. But my point on that I wanted to bring up when I had my hand up the first time was there's an example that this would have been very, very helpful for. And I don't remember if I mentioned it to this group or not, but back when the select board was looking at discussions with National Grid, and National Grid had their engineer, and then we, the town, had our own third-party engineer look at these requirements for their LA project. And there was one, I happened to be at that meeting, and there was one aspect that their engineer indicated about sea level rise and flooding and all this fun stuff. And they had all these numbers out there, and it was just thrown out as a matter of fact. And that's when I thought, hey, wait a minute, the Coastal Advisory Committee, this is what they should be doing, is providing some sort of guideline on this. And I did reach out to Vince, and we talked about it. But at the end of the day, I think at that point it would have been helpful for this document to have been provided for them. So I see that there's helpfulness for this moving forward before any of the laws and requirements that the regulatory boards can actually create are there. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Holly. Graham, you had your hand up.
Sorry, just with the language there, it does, the need use goes together, need be aware of and need use. So if that's a problem, as Holly brought up, maybe we need to address that, but it does need require very similar words. The sentence doesn't read right if you don't have the need, then you just take out be aware of. If the sentence doesn't read right with all town departments, blah, 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 use the best, you need the whatever auxiliary verb.
Yeah,
or we add a different one, or should use perhaps, if to Holly's point, if that's what's necessary.
Well, I think the language that we have is all right, and Holly, I think your objection was to strengthening it, but if there's something that we have an issue with right now, please point that out.
On Graham's point, I think that yes, having something else there besides be aware, because you're trying to give a strong recommendation for these regulatory boards in lieu of having any legal bylaw change. So having it should be aware, maybe there is another word that would be best to describe that, I'm thinking.
Holly,
just to clarify my point.
Yeah, go ahead, Graham.
Sorry, just to clarify my point, currently the need applies to both be aware of and use, if you read the sentence. And if that's a problem, then we need to change it, but it sounded like if it's not for Holly, and the requirement might fit towards Gary's point of being more strong, but need applies to both of those, be aware of, and need use.
Okay, I'm following you, Graham. Thank you. I hadn't caught what you were saying there. Matt, did you have your hand up or did I miss something? Need to unmute, Matt. Yeah.
Shift A, Command Shift A.
Or hold the space bar, I think also does it.
Maybe if you just add the word to after need to be aware of and use, that need to be aware of and need to, use, maybe that's all you need.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
There we go. Okay, this is easier. Maybe the word is follow. The other point I think is while we can't require it, I think our recommendation should be strong. And if the select board or planning board or someone else wants to weaken it, that's up to them. I think that we should be strong. I think if we go in sort of, if we go in sort of weak, they'll just, some of the guys, to build stuff, they'll just go in and weaken it even further. So I think our goal should be to go in a little stronger. And that's number one. And then to an earlier point, I think pictures of the flood zones, I think maps, you think about the planning board and think about these guys, you want to make sure they're clicking onto this. I think the pictures, if you say, okay, we've got 13 inches of whatever the number is of storm surge, here's where it impacts. If we're picking a number there, I think that would be more sort of educational than just asking people to go to a map and figure it out themselves.
Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think part of the reason we didn't pick a number was that we knew that the NOAA data was going to be updated this year. And so we didn't want to say, if it's 10 years out, use 2 inches, because NOAA might come out and say, well, 10 years from now, we now expect 6 inches. And Vince, go ahead with your comments there.
I'm happy to do as the committee directs or would like this to look. One of the reasons that there aren't any maps or images in the like in it was to try and reduce it down to 2 pages so it'll be usable and user friendly. Again, I'm happy to do as I'm directed.
Yeah, I think our recommendation is literally only the bold paragraph or the half of the first paragraph, and the rest of it is supporting information. I don't think that adding 10 pages worth of supporting information is going to help somebody. I think we need to keep the focus on our recommendation. And I think it's appropriate to provide the specific data that we're referencing, which is the NOAA data. But more than that, people need to do the homework. We're not doing the engineering for you.
Let me just ask a question.
Yeah.
If what you say, what you're saying is our recommendation is specific in the front. In the first paragraph. So if I read that, so now I'm saying the best and most current data. Does that clearly mean that the best and most current data is the data that's below?
We could modify that because through this discussion, we've been focusing on the NOAA data. We could modify that to say the most current data from NOAA.
Yeah, because this is just simply saying NOAA data will change. Just being a lawyer and being,
No, you've got a good point.
When I'm eliminating your wiggle room here. We should be saying the most and current data from NOAA or.
Right, so again, that points out to that sentence that's in the middle of the document that I'd like to see copied into the top.
Which sentence?
Yeah. The CRA recommends following the high NOAA projections to accommodate moderate storm surge as well as sea level rise.
Yep, I think we need to get that into the recommendation.
Okay, copy that up.
Sarah, you had your hand up, so I want to make sure that we don't skip over you.
Yeah, no, my comment was actually now it makes even more sense after what you just said, because I was going to reiterate that I think that we need to take the recommendations that we specify below and put them up front. Like I had said executive summary, but I think it needs to be part of that official recommendation. And so while we don't want to put I would not recommend putting a solid number on it, because as you keep saying, these numbers are updated. And the timeline is also might be different for different projects, whether it's a 10, 20, or 50-year timeline or 100 years. But I think we need to have that sentence of saying we recommend following the high NOAA projection, you know, for the given timeline of the project, because I'm not part of other regulatory boards, so you know, I don't know what the lifespan of some of the projects might be. I mean, I think of like a building, but I mean, there's so many other projects the town's involved in that I think just kind of stating it like that would cover a wide range. And then if we want to, if we're going to be including the storm surge data, which I think is really important, I do think we need to make some kind of recommendation in a similar sentence, because as Jen pointed out, they're actually like half foot intervals. So it's like 9, 9.5, 10, 10.5, 11, 11.5, like it goes up to 13 or 13.5 feet. And so, you know, if you open up that map and you see that there's so many different possibilities depending on where you are, I think we should just choose on the higher side to recommend for, just to be very clear to Fritz's point when the boards are looking at it.
I think that's what we did, is we went beyond the consultant's report, which used the intermediate high, and we used the high, and we've said right there, because we want to accommodate moderate storm surge as well as sea level rise. So rather than telling people they've got to add numbers from two different charts, we're saying, okay, we're going to use this one set of numbers to encompass all of that. Does everybody agree with that? Okay. Vince, can we take that sentence, copy it up and put it in the top, and then let's take a look and see what we have.
Just add it after this and just something like that. Oh, Control Z.
Yeah, it's your friend. Well, I don't want to strike it. Yeah, I don't want to strike it.
Yeah, I won't.
Yeah.
I'd put it before the however.
Yeah, so we've got, so hey, can you, so we want to change the most current data on that second line. We want to say the most current NOAA data, first of all. So
Okay,
need to use the best and most current NOAA data.
I'm waiting for this thing to go away.
Yeah.
All right, so second sentence. However, the data are periodically updated by NOAA.
So don't worry about that right now, because I want to see how it reads. So most current NOAA data. Second line.
Second line.
Yeah, need to use the best and most current NOAA data.
NOAA.
And best is irrelevant, so let's take best out. So need to use the most current data.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so need to use the most current NOAA data on sea level rise, flooding. Oh, that's why we can't say NOAA, because we said flooding and storm surge.
Well, you're bringing in NOAA in the last sentence now.
Yeah, but we say need to use the most current NOAA data on sea level rise, flooding and storm surge, but NOAA doesn't have data on flooding and storm surge, only on sea level rise.
How about this? You're just adding in as well as flooding and...
Yeah, it doesn't help, yeah.
Well, is the intent that we're using the NOAA data in applying the? I'm not using the wording. I'm just saying. So we're looking at the NOAA most recent NOAA data on storm level rise. I mean, is the idea in interpreting the flood and storm surge in their decisions?
So I think what we need to do is we need to take that last sentence and say people need to be aware of, or need to use the, All right, so how about this? CRAC recommends that all town departments, boards, commissions, and committees, and any service provider, contracted engineer, and consultant need to use the high NOAA projections to accommodate moderate storm surge as well as sea level rise. These data are periodically updated by NOAA.
Yeah.
So we're taking the CRAC recommends, putting that first at the beginning of the paragraph.
Okay.
Not the whole thing, just 3 words. Okay. Okay, so need to be aware of and need to use, and then so cut out after need to use where you started cutting out best, cut out everything until in there.
So this is all going.
Yeah, from best to storm surge in there.
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused.
So your cursor's at best, just arrow down and get rid of best and that whole next line, delete that.
So all of this.
Yep.
This much here or?
No, all the way to the end. It's all the way to the word there.
Okay,
Yeah.
delete.
Yeah. So we're now going to say the CRC recommends that people use the high NOAA projections. So we need to delete in the 4th line, the CRC recommends following.
This much?
Yes. All right, so it needs to use the high NOAA projections to accommodate moderate storm surge as well as sea level rise, and then we throw in their decisions, deliberations, and project planning.
Okay. Correct.
Okay, is that clear enough for people to follow, and what do you think?
I'm just going to do this NOAA here.
After the word rise should be in there.
Where, Gary?
So where it says sea level rise, you just started with decision, so it would be in there, decisions, deliberations.
Okay, I'm sorry, there's something in the middle of the screen.
Right.
Yeah, it's sorry, but yeah, it makes it tough on you.
Okay, so
Keep
one
going.
more time, Gary. Sea level.
Rise,
Right.
bingo, right there. So after rise,
Right there, yeah.
yeah,
In
and
there.
add in there.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, what do people think of that content? And then we can get a clean paragraph and see if we're missing any commas or anything like that.
Don't we need to get rid of decisions, deliberations, and project planning
No,
above?
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the bold area, yeah, decisions, deliberations, and project planning, and get rid of the however, because that's not helpful either.
Mm-hmm.
And then these data are periodically updated by, hold on, we lost them. That would be the last sentence. These data are periodically updated.
Yeah.
Decisions and deliberations.
Yeah, we'll get to the commas and the plurals and all that, but we want to get the sentence straight. So Vince, can you take that last bold sentence and move it to the end of the paragraph? Okay, what do people think? We lost a NOAA in the middle there, but we'll put it back.
Can we just accept all changes so that we can read it clearly?
Yeah, Vince, is there a way to accept the changes in that paragraph?
Okay, I'll just go through it quickly. Okay, the CRC, it won't do anything for me now, okay. Except, okay, that's all gone. That's all gone.
Okay, so keep going. Yeah, we need a NOAA before high. Yeah.
Alex, I'll fix
right.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
The CRAC recommends all town departments, boards, commissions and committees and any service providers, contract engineers and consultants need to be aware of all the needs of use the NOAA high projections.
they've got too many verbs in there. We're recommending.
Well, let's
Yeah.
talk about the content of the recommendation, and we can
Yeah.
wordsmith all of the grammar things
Yeah.
at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's close to it. I'll just read it aloud and see what
Yeah.
people think. The CRAC recommends that all town departments, boards, commissions and committees and any service providers, contract engineers and consultants need to be aware of and need to use the NOAA high projections to accommodate moderate storm surge as well as sea level rise in their decision and deliberations, and project planning. These data are periodically updated by NOAA.
Okay, is that clear, concise, what we want to say? Jen? I'll give you a second to read it. Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just didn't know if within this we want to say see below, or, you know, like for more specifics, because if we just say, you know, we recommend the high projections, I just.
No, the recommendation is a statement. The next thing we have is the supporting information. So I think we're good on that.
Okay, great.
Holly, yes. You need to unmute, Holly.
I recommend putting in the word "the" in front of "need."
All right, let's hold on that, Holly, and let's see if we're going to do any more changes. Jen, go ahead.
The thing that I would add here, I think this does clarify it once we work through everything.
Yeah.
I know we say the data are periodically updated by NOAA, but I also think it might be useful to have some kind of sentence in here that says the CRAC committee provides supporting data, which is what's below, and can update that periodically as well, or based on consultation with the CRAC. I don't know, something in there that says, that doesn't just send the boards to go look for new data on their own, but the idea that if data does get updated, that we can provide it.
So
in
how about
some shortened form?
How about referencing, so these data are periodically updated by NOAA and will be posted on the CRAC page on the town's website? Because I don't want us to be in the business of providing information and be requested to provide information.
I think that would work. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, further thoughts without getting into grammar and such. Are we there? Or we're only there for the first paragraph?
Well, I mean, that's the recommendation, so.
Right.
I think it makes it clear.
Okay, Vince, let's take a quick scroll through the further paragraphs just to make sure that we didn't leave anything chopped up or anything like that.
Sure. And also not to forget about the table Sarah was suggesting to delete. So was high projection, then the CRAC recommendation for high column highlighted.
Yep.
Okay, I'll fix that later. This is then on storm frequency and impact of sea level rise, which leads into the Army Corps of Engineers. Was there still a suggestion of removing this table and references to it?
Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's still important to remove the table just because it's confusing for the reasons we've talked about. And, you know, even under the previous table, there's the little note that's like the Army Corps of Engineers used the same data or the same information is used to develop it. So I think that we're not ignoring this. We're not like hiding data. It's just making it more clear, the recommendation that we are making more clear.
And I agree. Having two tables creates confusion.
Okay. Any significant objection to anyone, from anyone for me to remove it?
No.
And there's also, that's also nice because we get rid of the whole thing about the meters to feet conversion.
Okay. So this will have to be gone through here to remove references to table 2. Does this need to be?
You might add a reference to the town's website where we provide this, just as we have with the storm tide pathways.
A table, a reference, a guide.
Just say the report is available on the town, you know, because you're talking about the report.
Put in a link.
Yeah.
Note for myself for later.
So we need to get rid of C table 2, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then what about the following paragraph, the column in gray?
Yeah.
We're talking about a table, you know, parts of a table that are no longer there.
Correct. And then they can go find this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Storm surge. We're removing an additional resource and then bringing in storm surge. Do we need to make, or do we want to make, or does the committee want to make a recommendation on FEMA, which has not been mentioned in this document at all?
Are the storm tide pathways based on, do they incorporate FEMA?
No, not that I know, unless
okay.
Jen knows any different, or Sarah.
So how do those people who are involved in this sort of thing feel about adding the reference to FEMA? Or maybe Chuck, you can say that that's a given because it's already required. I don't know.
Right. Right. In terms of regulatory approval, you know, FEMA is kind of that first review to meet their, you know, base flood elevation requirements. I think, as you've stated, you're suggesting the consideration of additional amounts for sea level rise based on the NOAA high projections. I think it makes sense to me.
Makes sense without the FEMA reference. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think that we know that everybody already knows they have to look at FEMA, and we are suggesting that they go beyond that. The only thing we might do is state that we're saying that our recommendation is to go beyond the minimum FEMA recommendation. That would be an option, or that could again still be left to be understood. What do other people think about whether we should reference that?
It makes it clearer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's valuable because people would say, you know, oh, I don't have to do this, I've got FEMA. Doesn't that already take it into account? They don't know.
Yeah.
Right, and I think it clarifies that this is in addition to FEMA when FEMA exists for a location.
Sarah?
I hesitate using the language goes beyond because I worry that people will give pushback of saying we're doing too much. I just say this isn't
supplement.
Yeah, supplement to something like that. Because in some cases they might align very well. It's not that we're taking the FEMA and then adding footage. You know, we're using, you know, different and sometimes it does go beyond. So I think saying the supplement would be good.
Okay, we are an hour and 40 minutes in, so I want to make sure that we get sorry, not an hour and 10 minutes in, apologies, we get to the rest of our agenda. Are we okay with Vince setting out a revised draft? We'll add any suggestions for, little tiny language tweaks and commas and such. And I think Vince, then if you can send a final draft to us by email, if we can reply to that to say, yes, the final edits are acceptable by email, can we take a vote today to adopt this recommendation? If people think we can, I'll entertain a motion to do so.
I would make a motion to adopt the recommendation as, do we want to make a reference to as revised by, as provided? Well,
I don't know if I'm allowed to put words in your mouth. Move
Go ahead.
to recommend, as written today, pending final edits to be accepted via email. Is that?
that sounds, yeah, that's what I'm getting. Yeah.
Second.
I'm sorry, I missed who seconded? Matt seconded. Okay, so Fritz moved and Matt seconded. We need to do a roll call vote. I'm just going to go through the boxes on the screen. So Graham Durovich.
Aye.
Fritz McClure.
Aye.
Peter Brace.
Aye.
Gary Beller.
Aye.
Matt Fee. Don't forget to unmute, Matt.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. I think I got everybody. So that is adopted. Congratulations and thank you.
Yep.
So
Great.
hopefully we will, within 7 days' time, get that final version. And Matt, do you have a process that we should follow to put this on the agenda for the select board to consider?
As soon as it's done, we submit it to Dawn and Libby, and
Okay.
Dawn's here. She'll put it on when they
Okay.
get it in.
Great. Hallelujah. Okay, so the next item, and I apologize, did not take public comment on that on purpose. This is a recommendation from the committee, but I will pause if there is a member of the public here who has a comment on the document as we've adopted it. So I have Liz Trios, Emily Molden, and Deanne Atherton showing on my screen. If any one of you wants to make a comment, would you unmute yourself and give your name and say something? And I'm not hearing or seeing any response, so that's fine. We will move on. So we've just accomplished a major goal. Do we have additional goals? We brought this up at our last meeting. There were nothing offered, but I wanted to bring it back again in case in the interim people had thought of something that we wanted to address. So any ideas for goals or topics for future meetings? Jen, go ahead.
I apologize if this is going to come up later, Vince, but I guess my my thought is understanding, I guess, what our role is in the RFP process as the CRAC, and what our, I guess I kind of see that as what a potential goal or work of the committee might be, how we're involved, or how should we be involved in this, review of applications, selection of consultants, et cetera.
Mary, do you mind if I just take a minute just to give everyone an idea of where we are and then how CRAC will be involved?
Perfect. Thank you, Vince.
Okay, so attached to the agenda and also sent out in an email to this committee, both were done side by side so that it would save time. But just as a quick update, the RFP has been advertised. It is currently still being advertised. It will be, the last day is the end of the month, the 30th. And we will then take time after that, I think about a month, to go through the proposals that have been submitted by whichever companies or consultants. Then, roughly speaking, sometime in August, hopefully we should be able to hire a company. So that's just kind of where we are in this process. Then in terms of CRAC's role in it, I very purposefully, even at the suggestion of the committee, built in, and you should hopefully remember it, there's going to be quite a number of meetings with the consultants so that you'll be able to provide information. I've also been getting questions on this from some of the consultants. They've submitted questions in writing. I've been answering them. And I've also, on your behalf, offered the committee services to be able to support the roles of the consultant in things like data gathering and public opinion and that kind of thing. So the committee will have a substantial role in working with the consultants. That was always the intent, and it was put into the RFP by design.
Jen? You're muted. Yeah, there you go.
Yep. Thank you for that, Vince. Yes, I was clear on the fact that we'd be involved with the consultants after the fact. I guess my question is, as a advisory committee, and the fact that these are the consultants we'll be working with, if and how it makes sense for the CRAC committee to be involved in the selection of the consultants from the applications that you receive through the town. Because it seems to me that if we select someone that the committee is then frustrated with their proposal after the fact, then there's nothing we can do about it at that point. But if there is a conversation or some kind of input prior to selection, then that post work might end up going smoother.
Yeah. This is a tough one, but there is a reality to the situation. I have brought it up several times and tried to work to get a committee of 5 together to so that we can select the consultants from the proposals that we get. I had hoped that there could be a committee member on that committee. That is not town procedure, though. It's not something I can do. I argued strongly for this. It's sadly not going to be the case. So as it currently stands, the panel of 5 is myself, Jeff Carlson, Holly, Chuck, and a lady from procurement, Rebecca Woodley Oliver. That's the way that it has to be, I'm sorry to say. So there we go.
I don't mean to be contentious, but the review committees can often include people that are not town employees and are potentially experts on a subject. So I guess that confuses me a little bit on that point. And I don't know if there's a way to get clarification on that. But I also think we need to figure out if there is a way for the committee to have some kind of input on the consultant selection, even if they're not part of this 5-person review committee.
Good question.
Matt, please.
Yeah, Jen, I've sat on, as a select board member, I've sat on review committees and looked at documents. So I'd like, Vince, I'd like you to get in writing why it can't be any other way. I don't want to hear it. I don't think we should get it verbally, but ask in writing and get back in writing what the new policy is and why it has to be done this way. It'd be interesting just for us to know.
Sure, I'll work on that. It'll be through myself and probably Greg Tivnan that'll work on that.
That would be great. Thanks. And it doesn't have to be huge. It could be 3 sentences. Here's what we're doing now. Here's why we can't do it. But it has to be, we need to, we should know.
Okay.
Vince, was there any hint that this was related to having to meet via Zoom and not in person, or is that not the issue? No, okay, Holly's saying no, yeah. Sarah, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to, reiterate, I think we've talked about this before, but back up what Jen's saying, that I think, at least one representative from this board or more would be great to have as part of the hiring, especially since we've been, involved so much in a lot of the, in helping with the writing of the RFP, and then we're going to be working with this person, and then we've kind of got the most up-to-date information about what's going on, and obviously we can provide data and things, but I think it would be really important. So I just want to reiterate that.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, other comments, other ideas for goals? Obviously, we will be following the progress of the RFP to whatever extent is available to us to do. other things that we should be considering for future meetings. All right, Vince and I will continue to put agendas together with whatever comes up and whatever we feel is appropriate. You're always welcome to email the two of us with suggestions or questions about what we're covering in the meetings.
Mary, can I just
yes.
ask you?
Yes, of course.
Just to go back to what you were talking about, is it, does the RFP specifically set forth how and when they will report to the committee periodically before the finalization of the report?
Vince, can you address that?
Sure. So I think what I've built in was there's going to be was a quarterly meetings at least with the committee and written updates monthly is what I think I wrote in. I can clarify that for you later. The I think everyone has a copy of the scope of services section that has that in.
And the RFP is still available on the town website because it's posted until the 30th of June, right?
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, the related topic is, I'm sorry, Sarah, did you have a?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't bring this up when we were first talking about next steps because I thought there was going to be a line on the agenda, but I just double checked the agenda. I just wanted to report on the education committee, the subcommittee, because I know one of our goals was providing some educational materials. We haven't met, just like, you know, this is our first meeting of the full committee. So I just wanted to let you know, there's been no forward movement from our last report out, and we are going to hopefully be meeting soon. So we're going to be continuing with the educational goals, but I just wanted to put that out there in case it crossed anybody's mind.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Holly, I wasn't sure if you were adjusting your webcam or if you had a question.
No, I apologize.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so related to meetings, everybody's life is different. So I wanted to check in with people. Should we meet twice a month as we have been doing? Should we meet once a month during the summer? You know, is this a convenient time still? You know, Tuesday mornings it's Zoom, so it's, you know, it's just completely different. Anybody have any feedback, or should we continue as we've been going? Sorry, go ahead, Fritz, and I'll come to Jen.
Yeah. I'm happy to meet. I mean, I'm retired. I'm happy to meet as often as we want to meet. So it's not a question of time for me. I'm just looking at the question of having, if we finish the recommendations, and then really what else would we specifically be doing until we start hearing from the consultant? And really the summer is going to be the period in which we're choosing the consultant. So I can see that the education committee might be working on something and might want to report, but just remind me, is there something specific, something else specifically that we would need to be accomplishing in over the summer? I guess that's, so I guess what I'm saying is you might be able to do it once a month. Yeah.
And that was kind of my point for asking is, at least for July and August, I don't think we have a sense of urgency, and everybody in the town has plenty to do. So calling on other town departments to provide us with updates or answer questions is probably not the best use of their time right now. So that's what I wanted to have the discussion, you know, is once a month sufficient for the summer? And I'm sure our lives are all in catch-up mode or just trying to stay afloat mode. So why add 2 more hours on Zoom? Jen, I know you had a comment, so please go ahead.
That was essentially, I think, what my comment was going to be, Mary, is that my recommendation, or at least my hope right now, is I think we could go to 1 meeting a month for July and August. And then maybe when the consultants are on board, what that looks like might change when we have more work to do, but I would be okay with once a month right now.
Okay, and Sarah?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that as well. I know, you know, we're all getting busier, and my question was going to originally be, you know, to Fritz's point of we don't have as much to do. The educational committee we'll go over our goals and our targets when we meet again, but I think that I would also support once a month.
Anyone else? Graham?
I just wanted that to echo that, but also if we don't need 2 hours, then we can use less time. I don't think we need to feel like we need to fill 2 hours. If we need it, great. If we don't, we can be done earlier.
Great. Peter, Gary, any comments? Gary, you're on mute, but I see you shaking your head no. I'm going to assume that means no comments.
No comment, I'm fine.
Okay. Peter? So the only thing that I have, as luck would have it, I have a Tuesday commitment starting at lunchtime. Would people be comfortable starting our meeting at 10 instead of starting at 10:30 or 10:45? Just to give me a little bit of a breathing space between that other meeting.
Sure.
I see heads nodding. 10 o'clock is all right? Okay, Vince, can you check and see if 10 to 12 has any conflicts? And then the other question is, should we continue on the third Tuesday of the month just to kind of space those meetings out? I'm thinking again that if the RFP closes on June 30th, the first Tuesday in July, we won't have much, of an update on that, but by the third Tuesday, we might have more information. So kind of what I was thinking there. So 10 to 12, third Tuesday of the month, don't have to take the whole 2 hours if we don't need it. That's Peter?
And I just, before the meeting started, got an email from Erica Mooney saying that making a request of all the boards and committees in town that if at all possible, that we not book on the third Tuesday of every month. Because it's a very, very popular time. So if there's...
Do we want to go for second Tuesday? Is that...
At least for now, I guess.
Yeah. Sarah?
Yeah, it's funny because I just looked at my calendar and I happen to have another committee meeting on Tuesday at 10 a.m., that third Tuesday of the month.
All right, how about second Tuesday?
I don't know why that one.
We'll split the difference between first and third. And that may mean that we go to second and fourth in the future if that third Tuesday is a heavy day.
So that would be July 14th and August 11th.
I'll take your word for it. I've got so many screens, but I don't dare put a calendar up. Vince is giving me a thumbs up. Okay, so Vince will check that. But we'll assume second Tuesday of the month for July and August, 10 to 12. Not anticipating large agendas unless we get news from the RFP that we want to weigh in on.
My dog. My dog.
I'm glad the dog agrees, yes. Okay, so we do have our next agenda item is for public comment. Again, I will go to the three people that are on my screen. Is there anything that you wanted to bring to our attention today? Deanne Atherton,
yes.
I see you're unmuting. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to the members of the committee. I just wanted to provide some public reaction is that I think the public is looking to the CRAC to have a very active role in selecting the consultants. You are there because you represent the community, you bring various areas of expertise, and to hear that you wouldn't have a substantive role is somewhat disconcerting. So hopefully you can be assertive in this communication you're going to be sending, I guess, to the select board or to the town administration. I think from our perspective, the more the public can feel that there are members of the community engaged in this process, the more positive the outcome. There is a great sense of feeling out in the community already of impatience, that this is taking a long time, and meanwhile decisions are being made. So two things. One, I would urge that you advocate for an active role in the selection of the consultants. And two, I ask that you move ahead as expeditiously as possible.
Thank you, Dan. Can I clarify, since you didn't introduce yourself, are you speaking personally or are you speaking on behalf of an organization?
Well, I'm speaking, I guess, in my role as both. But the Coastal Conservancy, as you know, is the group that advocated for the development of coastal resiliency plans since 2015. So we have been following this whole issue very closely, and will continue.
All right, thank you, Deanne. And just want to make sure that we are recording those comments in the record of the meeting. Does anyone else from the public have comments or a question for the committee? Okay, if I accidentally skipped you and you're frantically trying to speak, just pop in a minute or two. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of March 3rd. Everybody should have received that. I did email Vince one change to a sentence. Vince, do we want to try and screen share that, or?
Just a quick comment before that. I know that people have only had it a couple of hours at this point. So just make that known that if you can't.
We got them last week too. Yeah, you sent them out last week.
No, I just sent them to you on Friday.
Oh, just to me, sorry. All right, is everybody comfortable with the minutes, or do we want to simply postpone that to our next meeting? I'm happy to do it either way.
Let's postpone. I haven't read them
Postpone?
yet.
Okay. All right, so we'll pass over that. Any other committee reports? So from our members who are members of other committees, that would be Planning Board, Conservation Commission, Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, Select Board, Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers, or any of the at-large members if they have reports from other groups that they might be involved with relative to coastal resiliency. This is a good time.
We haven't met since 3 months ago, like most of the committees, so nothing.
Just one comment. Vince asked me to reach out to RP Eady, and he's done a book about Cassandra Complex and how, warnings and how people who warn of things are ignored. He's agreed to speak to us sometime on a Zoom call if we can get to it, and I've got him and Vince together.
Okay, great. Thank you, Matt.
Just a comment on that, we're aiming for August.
Okay. And his book Warnings does include a chapter on sea level rise.
Yes.
Yeah. Gary, I saw that the Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers has a meeting scheduled in a couple of days, and you do have coastal resilience at the end of your agenda. Is there anything that you want to say in advance of that, or would you rather come back afterward?
They were just going to ask me for an update.
Okay.
As their representative, what's going on with the committee. And of course, we've been frustrated like every other committee because we kept asking, couldn't we meet? Couldn't we meet? And same way when I talked to Vince about our meeting here, and he kept saying, well, we have to get a slot at YouTube or whatever. So that's all.
Okay. Fritz, the planning board has resumed meeting, I think.
Yes, we have. We've met a couple of times. Initially, we were just doing A&R's approval not required, things that, or I should put it this way, things that didn't require a public hearing. Since that last night, we had a 4.5-hour meeting. It included public hearings. So we are starting back in the process, but it's certainly been not much action in terms of approval of meetings and action. There were, like I say, a period of like 2 months where we didn't meet at all. So things are starting to get busier again in terms of applications to the planning board.
Okay, I'll note that Matt Fee had left the meeting. Is there any other business that anyone wants to bring up? If none, then I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Seconded.
Okay. All right. So again, by roll call, starting with who's left on the screen, Graham Durovich.
Aye.
Fritz McClure.
Aye.
Peter Brace.
Aye.
Gary Beller.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Everybody
Thank
stay safe
Thank you.
Thank
everybody.
you.
and wear a mask.
Thanks.
Good to see you
Yep.
guys.
I'm now in Nantucket, so wear a mask.
We
Yay.
will, don't worry.
All right, I'm ending the recording. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Vince.